Good afternoon, everyone. Do you know that women are more than twice as likely to develop PTSD than men? Trauma and PTSD is the topic for today's session with Jeannine Rashidi. Jeannine is an Ayurvedic practitioner for the last 17 years with the area of focus on alleviating the core of physical, emotional, and mental tension. Jeannine is currently enrolled in the Ayurvedic doctorate program at Kerala Ayurvedic Academy, California. I am Amita from Nourish Doc, a global platform for natural and holistic therapies. I'd like to introduce all of you to Jeannine Rashidi, who's joining us live from San Jose, California. Welcome, Jeannine. Hello, can you hear me, Jeannine?
Thank you, Amita.
All right, so let's get started with PTSD. Jeannine, can you hear us? Well, I think she's having problems with her internet connection. I think her light went off. We are in California with all these fires burning. So let's wait for a moment until she joins us, and she will walk us through her healing the heart and the mind relationship. Jeannine, can you hear us? Okay, I'm just waiting for her to pop up, with her face.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, we can. We went out. I was just telling everyone we are living in California and dealing with all these blackouts. So we apologize, but we cannot. Yes, we can see you now. Okay. So
yes, I apologize for the connection.
Jeannine, can you hear us? Can you get started?
Okay, I can hear you now. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today at Nourish Doc. So today's topic, post-traumatic stress disorder and healing the relationship with myself, and how I came to develop the Adhere system, as well as to be enrolled now in the Ayurvedic doctor training program. So as I go through this, some stories create an inspiration for others, and some stories can actually create trauma. So I'm going to give you more of a high level of those events that happened in my life, but very carefully so that I also create them. And then I'm going to go through my journey, the motivation for breaking the cycles of dysfunction, and how I can be here in front of you today, where my mission is to bring about a revolution in how we relate harmoniously between the heart and mind with ourselves and others. Next slide.
Yes, we are there.
So post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder in which a person has difficulty recovering after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event, or in my case, many events. Now, this condition may last months or years with triggers that can bring back memories of the trauma accompanied by intense emotional and physical reactions. From an Ayurvedic perspective, this is undigestible experiences, also known as ama.
So I just wanted to clarify, ama is not only the undigested food, it's also the other like undigested mental, emotional, physical, everything included, right? That's what you're saying.
Yes, everything that we ingest through our senses or through our gut can be responsible for the creation of ama if we're unable to digest it.
Okay, all right.
So the first 25 years of my life was consistent psychological, sexual, emotional, and physical trauma. Next slide. So here's a bit of a timeline. I was born into addiction and violence. My parents, they were very imbalanced themselves. May they be blessed. And I was very fortunate that I had some amazing teachers, and I still do in this life, who took me under their wing and provided a space for me at school where I could learn and get good grades and get my emotional needs met, as well as be a part of the extracurricular activities that helped me process some of my emotions like music and sports, etc. But by the time I got into the sophomore year of high school, I was 15 years old. And I started wondering, why have I not seen a class that I can sign up for to help me deal with what's going on at home? Well, come to find out, there is no such a class. And to this day, I don't think there is one. And even though I was a straight A student, destined to go to college through scholarship and grades, I felt that anything was going to be better than living at home, and I wasn't willing to wait and didn't feel I could wait until I had completed high school. And so I ran away from home when I was 15. I learned how to live homeless. And living homeless had taught me many amazing survival skills, some of which I hope I never have to use again. But in any event, I learned them. But imagine a 15-year-old young girl living homeless that also brought its own set of trauma. And I met some very interesting people, many of which were Vietnam vets. And how do you think we connected? Through our trauma. And during this time, I met a man who was a bit older than I was, and we connected with our trauma as well. And what I wasn't aware of was that I was about to enter into an abusive relationship that was all too familiar, like what I had grown up in. You see, what happens is when we don't heal from those events that happen, those undigestible experiences, unconsciously, subconsciously, and statistically, we end up in the same type of scenario, or even worse, one can become an abuser. So here I am, I'm living homeless. I've entered into this relationship, and now I'm pregnant at 16. I marry him at 17. And this is what I call the fantasy illusion, because I was under the illusion that if I married, somehow marriage was going to change everything. It was going to cure his addiction, which just be the same addiction that my parents had. He wouldn't be abusive anymore. He'd be able to hold a job. Well, that wasn't the case. And of course, I'm still a child, even though at this point I have a daughter. And I end up pregnant again at 20. So both of my daughters grew up observing their mom having all of these traumatic experiences, physically, psychologically, emotionally, etc. And being that I was the sole provider, I was out at work all day. And then one day, I started noticing very similar and all too familiar signs and symptoms that my daughters were having that pointed out that the same cycle of abuse and dysfunction was happening with them. And this broke my heart because the intention of leaving home was to start a new life. But as I said, I hadn't healed those impressions yet. And I ended up in a very similar situation. And so it took many, many years to figure out how to leave that situation.
Jeannine, we can't hear you. Jeannine? Oh, I'm sorry, people who are watching. It's a very touching story, and for some reason, she's having problems with
Okay,
her.
I think I'm back.
Okay, you are back. I'm just apologizing because we keep losing you, and I think you're somewhere close to the
I
fire.
know.
I'm so sorry. So it's a
Yeah.
very story. It's a very touching story, Janine. And let's. I think you were just going to say. when your daughters were just very young babies, you thought about leaving again?
Yes, and I'm not able to see the slides, but I'm just gonna have to wing it.
We can't see
Okay,
you. We
so
can't see
it took
you as
me
well. We can't see you as well. So I don't know what happened. Jeannine? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we cannot see you. I'm sorry.
Okay, hold on. Let's see.
We have people in Zoom, so please bear with us. I'm so sorry. Otherwise, you can continue to talk, and I can walk you through the slides. If you can just dial in, that's perfectly fine. Hello, Jeannine. I'm so sorry for people who have joined us on Zoom. We're trying to figure it out. Let her. She should hopefully. If not, we'll have to. Let's wait for a couple of minutes. Let's wait for a few minutes and see if she's able to join us. It's a very touching story. She has a very touching story. I wanted everyone to hear her story. So let's see if she can join us again. Hello, Jeannine.
All right, can you?
We can.
Oh, yep.
Okay, you're breaking up. Can you say something?
I can.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but in between.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, this is much better. This is much better. Okay, let's give it a shot. Otherwise, I
All
think.
right, let's see if we can get through this.
Otherwise, we'll have to repeat it at some point. But
okay, so
okay. All right, please go ahead.
Okay, so like I said, it took many attempts to finally leave that situation. By the time I was 25 years old, my daughters were about 8 and 4, and through very creative means, we figured out how to leave that situation. Next slide. And so here's what I was left with on a personal level. I had hypertension. I was obese at 240 pounds, severe migraines, insomnia, irregular periods. Psychologically, I had intense flashbacks, fear, unwanted thoughts, hypervigilance. I was suspicious of everybody. In fact, my belief by that time was that everyone was out to create harm in my direction. It was only a matter of time before they showed their true colors. I had nightmares, night terrors, anxiety, depression. I had memory issues, and I was also a smoker. Here's what I learned. What we feel, think, and experience, it circulates throughout the entire body. And this is also something that we learn in Ayurveda. If there is happiness and trust circulating through your being, that is more of a healthy state. But in my case, there was sadness, fear, anger, trauma, and more, and that's what was creating dis-ease. And this is what that looked like. I was completely disconnected from my heart and my mind. In fact, I had built up such an amazing hard wall around my heart so that I wouldn't be hurt again, that I learned later on that I was actually keeping my own feelings hostage. The maze that I had created in my mind was such that if only one person knows a part of me, then they can't hurt me. And that was going to show later on in my experiences to actually be quite harmful for my growth. So I needed to learn how to create a better relationship with myself. Well, how do you create an understanding and loving relationship with your heart mind when all of the experiences, the mother principle was a violation, the father principle was a violation, and that first intimate relationship was also a violation? So how do you do that? And this picture captures it all. Next slide. So what is relationship? Relationship is the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. That means I had to learn how to observe my conditioned self. I had to become aware of my thoughts and my feelings. And I also had to be aware of my own inner talk, which was lacking love. And I also needed courage and I needed commitment. I needed courage to see myself where I was as I was. And I also needed courage to change. Well, here's where it got interesting, because in order to change, there's a bit of a nervous feeling that comes as well as excitement. And if you ever have been on the verge of a fear experience or an excitement experience, it's quite a fine line. It's only when you're on one side of it or the other that you realize where you're at. Well, this feeling alone was very triggering, which was making it very challenging to change. In fact, the word change triggered me. So I needed commitment to learn to love myself first, and commitment to get to know myself. And how do you do that? You date yourself. And here's what I learned when I began dating myself. All of those past skills, they were great for keeping me alive and got me to where I had been as far as starting the cycle of breaking those cycles of dysfunctions. But all of those skills were actually quite harmful. Imagine being in a relationship where your partner believes that it's only a matter of time before they create harm. To always be in a mindset where it's all about, okay, when this situation becomes bad, this is how I'm going to escape it. That was my mindset, and I had to unlearn those skills. Well, this was, again, a very challenging situation because it defined me. It was who I was. It was all that I knew. But in any event, I had to unlearn it so that I could learn some new skills. I had to change how I was relating with my story. So how was I going to change how I related with my story? And this is where I started developing more of the work that not only was I doing on myself, but now that I do with my clients. And that is, when you're hearing your own story, you want to imagine that you're hearing it from a child, your inner child. How would you respond so that the child felt seen, heard, and comforted in a way that allows for growth and independence? Now, this was interesting when I started doing this inner child work, because every time I would bump up against my own inner child, I was triggered because all I could know and remember was the innocence that was lost. What happens in a trauma mind is, in order to survive, you disconnect. And with each experience, there's another disconnect. So from my perspective, I felt that there were so many different disconnected versions of Jeannine that it was a bit overwhelming. So I needed help with that, obviously. And here's what I discovered. My darkness, it needed light. My ignorance, it needed wisdom. My judgment needed self-love. And I had to start looking at each moment as an opportunity for growth. What I mean by this is that when I was in interaction with anyone, I noticed this person reacts to a certain situation much differently than I do. So then I got to thinking, I wonder if people think the same way as I do. And so then I just started asking questions, and come to find out, people weren't thinking the way that I was. I was continually thinking that harm was coming. So in that way, I learned from others. But then what happens when we're in an adversarial confrontation and one wants to point the finger? And this is going to sound really cliche, but yes, you have to look at those three fingers pointing back at you. And what those three fingers are saying, let your triggers be your teacher. All of that insecurity, uncertainty, anger, etc., they became my teachers. That person that may have evoked a trigger response was actually a blessing. They were pointing out that which was already there. The second finger was showing me that I needed to question my thoughts. And the way I did that was I discovered the work by Byron Katie. And she asked really powerful questions. The first one being, is the belief or thought true? Well, if you remember, my belief was that everyone was going to create harm. It was just a matter of time. Now, was that true presently? I had no concrete evidence that that was true. My past said that that was true. So I was not certain if that belief was true. And then the third question was, who would I be without this thought or this belief? Well, the possibilities were endless. And that's what gave me the courage to face everything and rise, which is the acronym that I use, especially when I'm in a fear state or somebody else is in a fear state. This scaredy cat here on this slide reminds me of my almost 3-year-old grandson. And he comes over and he sees one of our cats. He runs in the opposite direction saying, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid, which to me is a pretty amazing self-regulating thing that he's doing by telling himself he's not afraid. And yet you can see every part of his body is afraid of this cat. And so I asked him, Xavier, what are you not afraid of? He says, Grandma, I'm not afraid of the cat. And I said, oh, are you sure? And he says, yeah. And he's kind of trembling. And so because we're trying to break these cycles, we go to the cat and I show him that the cat is not a threat. And in that way, we're all continually working on those impressions. So now a little bit more of the timeline. I had left that situation, tried to start a new life, and the sole purpose was to change the cycle of dysfunction, which meant getting into therapy. And my daughters had their own individual therapists. I eventually found the right therapist, but that journey for me was interesting because that's where I learned that the details of my story were traumatizing, even to the professionals. Until I ended up in front of a psychiatrist who just said, oh, you can take the Zoloft and Prozac, and basically I would have to live my life this way. And I said, well, I'm open to that, but how do I get to the core of this? I want to heal this. I couldn't get a straight answer. The Zoloft and Prozac just numbed me, and that wasn't going to work. I wanted to feel. So that's when I started seeking out other healing modalities. While that's going on, I got my certification as a massage therapist. I already had a sales background from my previous career, and I began my business Goodbye Tension. Now, what's interesting here is that the clientele that was continually coming in, they all had trauma. And I thought to myself, I'm probably not the right person to help with this because I'm still healing my own trauma. I would later learn that that belief is actually incorrect. They sensed my ability to understand the trauma, to hold the space for healing. But what this did was this propelled me forward to continually work on my stuff as well as learn how to help my clients. So while healing was happening, learning was happening, I learned different modalities that worked for me. Therefore, I either became trained or certified in, and I naturally brought them to my practice. Now, if you remember all those symptoms that I mentioned, I was obese, and I learned how to lose 90 pounds naturally. But I lost too much too fast, and this is eventually what brought me to Ayurveda, because I had completely depleted my system, and I'll get to that in a second. Part of my healing also included yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, etc., which helps balance the body-mind system. Now, as all of this healing is going on, remember, my intention is to not repeat the same cycle, which meant the next partner needed to be much healthier. And that's when I met my current husband. And what's beautiful about this is that he could see that both of my children were missing that healthy father principle. Being a single parent, I could only do so much, obviously, but I embody more feminine because that's the body I'm in. And so he adopted them at their consent. And we had this beautiful ceremony at the courthouse where they got new birth certificates, which meant a rebirthing, a new birth. And that's when that essence of father principle could come in and that healing could begin. Well, my husband also gifted me my very first book on Ayurveda and yoga, and I was quite intrigued. A year or so later, I ended up with a medical issue that came up that the Western medicine could not figure out. And in fact, they diagnosed it as a spell. And I thought to myself, maybe I need to seek out a witch doctor. I'm only partially joking. But anyway, I remembered this book. And so I did a search. And that's when I saw that Kerala Ayurveda Academy had a doctor there who was seeing clients. And so I booked an appointment and I met Dr. Jayarajan Kudikanath. And I sat in front of him. And after 90 minutes of talking about all of my symptoms, he checked my tongue. He did some weird pulse thing. He said, I have a plan for you. And I thought, how is it that with all of the diagnostic tools that Western medicine has, they couldn't figure it out. And yet this doctor is very confident that he can help me. Well, I was quite intrigued by this. And so in conjunction with healing the Ayurvedic way, I signed up for the first level program. And just to, heal myself, well, naturally, I brought that into my good by tension into a clinic of relieving tension physically, mentally, emotionally, and digestively. Now, if you remember, my goals for my daughters was one, don't get pregnant as a teen. The second one was finish high school. And the third one was to get into relationships that were healthier than their mom had. And so while I was going through my education, that's what happened. Daughters didn't get pregnant. Daughters finished school, and daughters both married healthier partners than what they had grown up with. And then I became a grandmother. And I will tell you that when you have a goal to break familial cycles of dysfunction, to witness and be a part of the birthing of that generation, it makes it all worthwhile. So my latest two granddaughters, born from each of my daughters, they were actually born 5 hours apart from each other. So I was able to physically be in the delivery room with my youngest and on FaceTime with my eldest, who was having her second child. And I have to tell you, to witness that, to be a part of that, it made it all worth it. It also showed me the importance of why this continuation of healing must happen, because generation after generation is coming through. We don't want those type of impressions on our young ones because that determines the future of our communities and the world. And I continued with my Ayurvedic education and to where I am today, which is a doctor of Ayurveda in training. Next slide. So what I did was I took my negative experiences that seemed like a minus, added some awareness and made that positive. All of that emotional baggage turned into an unusually large bag of experiences and tools. Go ahead, next slide. So here is what Ayurveda taught me. And all of these principles that you're seeing here on these slides are also what I take each of my clients through. This is foundational because no matter what herbs or spices you are given, They really only work well if you have these 5 pillars in line, and that is food, water, breath, lifestyle, and perception. So the food piece, remember I lost all that weight. Well, I was eating bland, frozen chicken. Yeah, I had cooked it. Absolutely no carbohydrates, some vegetables, and I wasn't eating at the proper time. In fact, I was eating every 3 hours. My digestive fire by the time I came to Ayurveda was very low. I learned about eating at the proper time. And then came water. Well, I was drinking a gallon of water a day and it was ice cold. That means my digestive fire, as well as my mental digestive fire, was being dampened and put out. So I learned about the proper amount of water to drink, drinking it at room temperature, and then breath. Wherever the breath goes, the mind follows. So I learned about the consistency of doing breath work in order to keep my mind, body in balance. And the next is lifestyle. So the sleep time actually determines your entire routine. When you sleep also determines whether or not your mind can digest those impressions. And the Ayurvedic mental digestion time is from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. I was sleeping at 3 a.m. So I was missing all of that mental digestion. So I had to slowly work at getting that back on a healthy routine. Now I've written here alone time. That's not something that I learned Ayurvedically. That's something I've learned as a result of getting to know myself. How do I even know who I am if I don't spend time with myself? And I don't mean during my workouts or chores, things like that. It's true introspection, self-reflection. And I really feel that that is key when healing undigestible impressions. And then next is perception. So as I said earlier, we ingest through our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, smell, and that's how we ingest. Too much stimulation is too much, as well as the other side, not enough is not enough. That needs more awareness, becoming aware of my senses, how much I was bringing in, or if more needed to be brought in. Charaka, which is one of the greatest scholars of Ayurveda, he says Hridaye Chetana Sthanam, which is Sanskrit for the seat of consciousness resides in the heart. When I read this, it was like music to my heart because it made perfect sense. The mind is also in the heart from an Ayurvedic perspective. So this spoke volumes to my intention of healing the heart mind. And it was also a sign that, Jeannine, you're on the right track here. Keep going. And so that's how I came up with the adhere system, which means to be true to. This is a 5-phase system. Adhere is the acronym. First, you have to explore what's going on. And the way this works, at least from how I work with clients as well as do my own inner work, is I have to be willing to explore, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Did I get triggered by something? What was going on there? And that's when I will discover that which needs to be healed. So you remember I spoke about all these disconnected aspects. I had to be willing to explore and look at, discover these disconnected aspects of myself, which meant I had to give all these little inner children, who are all a part of me anyway, some love and understanding. Now, how was I going to do that? Because my experiences of mother and experiences of father, they taught me something amazing, and that is what not to do. It didn't teach me what to do, though. And so this is where I learned how to embody the mother principle within myself, as well as the father principle within myself, so that when I discovered these aspects, I could give those little versions of me the healing that I needed. Now, once healing starts happening, you have to start integrating with that part of you. And that's what these two B's represent. They finally discovered each other, healing is happening, and they're coming into integration. Well, that means you have to start getting to know yourself all over again. That's where relating comes in. You have to learn, who are you now that this aspect has become integrated, because you're completely different, you're upgraded. That also means the world around you, you will relate with it different, and they will also notice a difference. So this heart-mind integration work at here is good for shifting out of being stuck, learning to live in the present moment, manifesting, conflict resolution, physical, mental, and emotional healing, as well as relieving anxiety, depression, all forms of stress, and trauma. Now, when I say trauma here, you don't have to have had such intense experiences like I've had. It could be something like this. Let's say you're in a relationship, and this is actually a case that I have. And a gentleman comes in and he says, you know, I noticed that in my marriage, I'm continually needing approval from my wife, and it's becoming a problem. I don't know what that's about. And so we did this entire process, and what we discovered was that when he was 2 years old, he drew this lovely heartfelt picture for his mother, and he went to show it to her. Now, mom was busy making dinner for the family, and so she shooed him away. That moment left an impression of rejection. And so he was constantly seeking approval in every feminine relationship from that point on. And last I checked, the relationship that he has now with his wife is a much healthier one. There's not as much neediness there. He's a lot more self-sufficient. So a bit more about the process. The exploration phase. Like I said, this can happen through just conversation, where I may notice you're using a particular word often or phrase, or maybe you actually know a moment that happened that you're struggling with. In any event, I use a lot of guided breathing and relaxation, because when it comes to doing the inner work, we have to come back to our side where there's a lot of outside stimulation. So using the breath to come back to the body, making sure that one is in their body, not out of their body, which can happen with trauma, as well as being able to be out of your head. This is not a thinking system. This is more of a dropping in and experiencing. So as the exploration phase is happening, next we move to the discovery phase. What is showing up? And this is where it gets very interesting, because we are all uniquely different. I have never had one session that is like any other, and I never know how it's going to develop a client in order to do this. The client also has to be willing to see what is discovered, whether they like it or not, because the only way you can change is you have to be willing to look at those things that you might not want to see. And then once you're able to do that, then the healing can happen. You start healing that disconnection, that part of you that's been disconnected this whole time, just waiting to come into integration so you can be more whole. And that's where you need understanding and love. And then the integration phase. This is where you come into a place of acceptance now, and you become an upgraded version of you. So after each session, I always say, you know, hello, so-and-so version 2.0, to remind them that who they were before they started this process is not who they are now. And that's where relating comes in. You have to get to know yourself with this new version of you. You have to also be open to change. And this is where I use the term weeding your garden. So we have this beautiful garden, and our friends or family, they represent all the different things in the garden. But when one is changing, there needs to be room and space for growth, which means sometimes some of the plants and herbs in your garden, they might need to be moved to a different garden, or moved away in a way so that you can grow. This journey, it begins with you. When you are healthy and balanced, your relationships, they become healthy and balanced. When your relationships are healthy and balanced, communities become healthy and balanced. And when communities are healthy and balanced, the world becomes healthy and balanced. And I think we can all agree that everything that's going on in our world, if you look closely, it really has to do with an inability to relate. The better we know ourselves, the more wholeness we bring to our relationships. So we're not acting from those disconnected aspects who are running the show that could essentially be creating harm because they're not integrated. They're still in a state of dysfunction. Thank you.
This is absolutely beautiful, Tilly. I mean, I'm so touched by your story, your personal story, and people who are in Zoom, that you're welcome to ask questions from Jeannine. There were hiccups, in our session. We apologize for that, but touching, so beautiful. I think it can really help a lot of women in the healing process.
Thank you.
So, please ask questions. And I'm just curious. I'll just start off some question. And those pictures that you showed of yourself when you were, overweight, how did this whole feeling come to you that you want to change? I mean, what triggered you? Was there any trigger? Because at that time, I don't think there was Ayurveda that was, people didn't even know what Ayurveda was in this country at that time. I'm just guessing, right?
Yeah, and I didn't even know what it was. The first motivation, obviously, was when I recognized history repeated itself with my own children. And
Yeah.
so that was the motivation for that piece of it. The other piece was when we started our new life, I signed up my daughters for Little League Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't even run around the bases with them. And inside, I was like, this is not the mom that I want to be. I want to be active.
Yeah.
So again, it had to do with my wanting to be better for my children. That's what motivated it.
And then you slowly started discovering yourself and then going into the positive trajectory rather than being in a negative or all kind of issues that you had. And then what prompted you to
Right.
become a healer? What prompted you? Was this only your personal experience, or this is just, I'm just curious,
Actually,
like what
you're
led you?
gonna laugh because when I signed up for massage school, it was very logical. I never had a massage. I honestly did not even know what I was getting into, except I wanted to be able to have a profession where I could create my own hours. And
Okay.
I knew how to market. When I got into massage school, I started noticing all of my own trauma coming up.
Yeah.
And come to find out, I was actually really good at it.
Yeah.
So it was through, and then of course my own experiences started, it became apparent because of the type of clientele I was attracting. People naturally, even if they don't know my story, they just
Yeah.
naturally start talking about these things. And so I must exude it and create a sense of safety for people in order to open up and start the healing process.
And then the Ayurveda journey came after how many years when you
So
started?
I've only been in the Ayurvedic field now for 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then what prompted you to start the doctorate program?
You know, part of it was, remember I left school so young?
Yeah.
There was always this drive.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing was Ayurveda helped me so much, and it was helping my clients as I brought it into my practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I just deeply wanted to learn more. When I started learning Sanskrit, I realized I want to understand deeply what these Ayurvedic teachers were trying to, express in their writings, but that means I have to understand Sanskrit. Well, when I started learning Sanskrit, I started noticing the healing of just saying the sounds and writing the letters. And I was like, this is magical. There's something deeper here about this. And it's interesting. Those of us who are in Ayurveda, most of us realize you don't choose Ayurveda. Ayurveda chooses you. And so I've honored that. I've honored that this opportunity has come and that there's time and space to be able to even dive deeper with these studies.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And what you are doing, what you've done to yourself and what you're doing to the community, I think that's just beautiful.
Thank
Really,
you.
yeah. Any questions from the, from people who are listening right now? If you want, we can repeat this session because I would like to repeat this at some point, Jeannine.
I would too. I feel like it got a little choppy there, so I will gladly come back and
Okay.
do it.
Yeah, I would like to do that because, but I think we did get to hear your story. So if there are any questions, please let us know, and let us know your feedback also. If what you like to hear more, and if you like to have a group workshop, maybe Jeannine, I don't know if you've thought about it, offering
Yep.
a group workshop, for women who've gone through trauma. I think women have gone through trauma more than men. So
Yes
offering,
and no, you'd be
yeah,
surprised. It's just men
okay,
don't talk about it as much, but you are right. And I have a lot of things going on where I'm working on that. I'm actually in the middle of writing a book about this specific thing. So there is a lot more to come, but if there is enough of a response from viewers that they'd like me to do that sooner rather than later, I have no problem putting that together, and it would be my honor to do so.
okay, great. Yes, absolutely. All right. So if there are no more questions, then we'd like to end this session, and we would probably repeat this session. Let us know about your feedback. We've written our email as well as our website address. So any last thoughts from you, Jeannine, before we end this session?
I just hope that you will all be inspired to continually work on yourselves for your sake and the future of the world.
That's very beautiful. With that beautiful thought, we'd like to wrap up this session. Have a great weekend. Thank
You
you so
too.
much. Yes, thank you so much. Bye bye now.
Bye-bye.